Welcome to today's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Larry Scherzer, Global Head of Strategy and Payment Solutions for Cisco Systems Capital. That's a long title, and I'm glad it only took me once to get it done, Larry. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm glad to be here.
So, Larry, for those people who might not be familiar with your career in equipment finance to date, do you mind just kind of sharing your backstory?
Sure. Like many, I didn't plan to enter the equipment leasing industry. I started actually, and the way I found my way here was by attending graduate school in Boston. I went to Northeastern University, and they had an intern program in both their law schools and their business schools. And I did an internship at a local computer company up in the Boston area. It's called Prime Computer. Most people have never heard of Prime, but they heard of Digital or Data General, Wang. They were all similar companies with different niches. And I was working in a software group, and I was going to go into sales. And they wound up sending me to a sales training class. And I met another guy that was taking the sales training and about products and things. And I said, "Hey, what do you do?" He goes, "I work in leasing and I sell financing." And I'm like, "Wow, that sounds cool. I'm looking to go into sales. I'm getting an MBA in finance. Tell me more about it." So long story short, I wound up joining that group, the captive, and I went into the credit department for a year, learned how to underwrite credit, and then they sent me out to the field with little to no sales experience. I moved to Texas from Boston, and I worked there for a few years, and unfortunately, I got there right when the oil industry took a dive. And so one thing that happened was all the companies there had a hard time getting credit. So it was a little bit trial by fire. I got to learn how to structure deals at a very early age. And then I got promoted and I moved to Washington, D.C., and where I worked there for a few years. And then we were acquired by LeaseTech, which became Key Bank, or Key Bank acquired LeaseTech. And the opportunity was to move to Boulder. And I was from the East, and I was trying to work my way back to the East. And I wound up joining AT&T Capital. And so there I was with a core group that went through 5 acquisitions in 6 years. It went from AT&T Capital to Nomura to Newcourt Credit Group to CIT to Tyco. Tyco then spun CIT back out independent. So got a lot of visibility to changes. And each new management team came in and had to cut expenses by 15%. So that was interesting because a lot of your relationships and mentors were leaving or let go. So it was a very dynamic experience, to say the least. But I learned a lot, had some really interesting roles. I was in sales. I ran and started up a venture leasing group for CIT during the dot-com era. And then when the dot-com burst, we wound it down, but we actually never lost any money, which was surprising. And during that time, we started doing venture leasing for some of our vendor partners, which were Dell and Microsoft and Lucent at the time. And through that, found my way working for Dell Financial Services. We had a joint venture with Dell, and I managed that joint venture for the CIT ownership position for 8 years. So Dell had their representatives and CIT had theirs, and saw humongous growth over that time. We grew a consumer business, we grew an SMB business, and when I started, it was about $300 million in originations, and when it was at its height, it was $6 billion globally. So it was a lot of growth there. And after that, I moved over to Societe Generale, which was starting up in the United States. And I didn't know much about SocGen, but they were the largest vendor leasing company in Europe, huge, $28 billion in managed assets. And I was fortunate enough to be hired on. I was the first hire from a French expatriate who was building a management team. and we were tasked with growing a vendor business in the U.S. To about $1 billion in 5 years, and we wound up growing, or first I was hiring a team, and then we grew it to $1 billion in 3 years. So we grew much faster, but timing's everything. The U.S. was going through a liquidity crunch, the 2008 timeframe, and we were a foreign company with foreign source of funds. But then 6 years later, that flipped around. Europe had its own financial crisis, and it worked the other way. So things, the pendulum swings. But after that, I found my way to Cisco Capital, and I've been here about 8 years, a couple of different roles. But currently, we're managing initially a product development team that has evolved into a payment solutions group. And so what we do is we develop all sorts of payment products, everything that's not net 30. So, anything that's not cash up front, paid over time. So that includes software financing, leases, loans, deferrals, consumption models, things like that. So it's been very dynamic, especially in the last couple of years with the shift to as a service. And so it's been a really good learning experience.
No, and that's an interesting model, because on the consumer side of things, it's so advanced, right? I mean, I think of all the different payment portals you have to send somebody money from a peer-to-peer perspective, and it's like, how far does business lag behind? So that's an interesting product development team to run.
Right. Our biggest challenge is not the lack of ideas or energy around it. It's the constraints of systems. You have these legacy systems. You have big global, different systems in different countries patchwork together. It was designed for a net 30 delivery, and now you're trying to deliver over time or this as a service, and so it's very hard, very challenging.
So what is it like being in a global role? You on planes internationally quite a bit prior to, I guess, Q2 of 2020?
Right. We were targeted because before the pandemic, Cisco really embraced the remote working. They manufacture a lot of the tools that enable remote working, and WebEx being one of the main ones. But so, just an example, our whole management team was located all over the world. Our CEO was in Washington State. Our head of sales was in Switzerland. Our CFO was in Atlanta. It's all over the place. And so it functions very well. And so we do targeted traveling. So we'll travel, build relationships. If there's an event or a meeting or a customer need, we'll do that. But we don't travel as much as some other companies might.
Well, that's I guess good and bad. I mean, I think of some of the internationals appeal to some of these opportunities out there, and it's like, yeah, that would be nice until it's like back to back to back. Then you're like, okay, that's enough of that.
Right. Yeah. In my prior role, I traveled quite a bit. Actually, I'm like a lifetime titanium in Marriott, and I didn't even realize how you get there. And they said, well, you have to have a minimum 750 nights to stay and to get that qualification. And you think about it, that's 2 years of my life just in a Marriott, not including all the other hotels. So yeah, I definitely did my travel stint.
Well, that's good. Sure. Have you been on the road yet? Have you been on the road yet this year?
For the first time personally, we went on the road to my wife's mother had a 80th birthday, and she hadn't seen her relatives in 1.5 to 2 years. So we just did that, but not for work. We're still in a lockdown through July, and then it's going to be phased in. So I don't expect we'll be doing any traveling till close to end of the year, and then it'll be like I said, targeted at some event, like trying to get managers back together or something like that for a kickoff meeting or something like that. But they've already said that don't expect to be traveling much. And I think some of the companies, well, two things. One, there's a benefit to the savings in OpEx. Two, a lot of companies saw that they could be very effective working remotely, but I know a lot of people, you can never replace that personal connection, that, in-person relationship building. And so that, there'll be a balance, but it'll be interesting to see how the companies will respond.
No, and that's a good point. And it's kind of been one of those points where I've been talking to people about it on this format. And also when we had an in-person event last week in Minnesota, we had 60 people for one event, and then we had 40 for another. So it was nice to see people congregate back together. As the person putting on the event, like, I had different breaks, and it was harder to get people to get back focusing on the thing. I don't blame them, because people haven't seen people for like 18 months, and I understand that. But you bring up an interesting point where it's that OpEx, right, or the CapEx, and it's, what are people going to do from a 2022 forecast perspective from a sales? I mean, because we've been performing very well without the cost of travel, without any of that. But how far are they going to allow that to swing back? I doubt it's going to be going to pre-2020 numbers.
Right.
But when does that go back, or does it ever go back? It's interesting.
Well, I definitely miss it. And it's an adjustment working remotely, which, I had to do before the pandemic. But then again, I also commuted 1.5 to 2 hours each way, before I joined Cisco. So there's trade-offs with that. You save 3 to 4 hours a day of sitting in the car. So I'll take that over, sitting in the same room all day. But I do miss the interaction with people,
Well, I think it's targeting now the ELFA annual will probably be the big one before. I mean, that'll probably be the next big event that I'll probably see you at in person.
That in person. Is that what? Have you heard that? Have they decided yet?
I booked my Marriott last week, so I would probably get it. I'm assuming that'll probably be a pretty good turnout, just based on what I've been hearing from people. But I'm excited for it nonetheless.
Great. And where is that in? I don't even remember. Is that Dallas or Austin?
San Antonio.
San Antonio. Okay. Perfect.
So I'm looking forward to that. NIFA will have an event in October. It's like earlier part of October in Charlotte, but I don't think that Cisco's a portion of that. But they're anticipating their events typically hold between 200 and 300 people. They might have to have a spillover event, because they're getting enough interest right now for 300 to 500 people, which is kind of crazy, but it's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Awesome.
So we keep trending.
I think a lot of people are just pent up demand to get back together, and like I said, it's event driven. I think a lot of companies will support it. It's for those one customer meeting where it's like for an hour, you fly to another city. They might be a little more conservative on that, but again, it'll depend on the situation, the company.
Nope, I agree 100%. I think people are going to sit there and they're going to be very cautious and say, okay, typically it's like you have an opportunity, let's jump on a plane and get in front of the people, let's put our best foot forward. Now, an advantage of technology like this is you can have more people involved in the upfront process before the sale actually starts, which is great.
Yeah, definitely.
So you spent the majority of your career on the captive side. Like, any particular thing that drew you into, working for captive finance organizations?
Well, first I just started in a captive with that, the first company, but actually that whole stint with CIT and then with SocGen was non-captive, but it was building captives for OEMs and manufacturers. So actually I got to sit on both sides of the table, and they both have lots of pluses to it. And I don't know if I really have a preference one way or the other, but just now working for Cisco, one of the main benefits is that, it is a captive. It's got, business that exists that you just have to go get yourself involved with. The downside is it's not a finance company, and the priorities are not the same. They're different. And you're not, you don't carry the same weight that you would maybe in a, finance company or a bank. So you're always trying to, get involved, but that trade-off of not having to knock on cold call for volume or, deals. But on the other hand, you're not also the priority sometimes. So there's a trade-off, but they're both good. But Cisco's great because it's such a huge global company, and then the products are, right in the middle of this whole growth boom in the internet, 5G, work from home, hybrid. So it's a great place to be because there's plenty of growth that's going to occur over the next few years, and Cisco is right in the middle of it. So, of all the companies out there, it's definitely one of the good ones to be at.
No, that's fantastic. I guess while we're talking about Cisco, so from a culture perspective, can we talk about that? I mean, before we actually started recording, you were talking about where you actually had last Friday off for Juneteenth, and that's amazing considering what it was a week ago.
Right.
So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I've been really pleasantly surprised because I've worked with a bunch of either for or with tech companies in the past, and Cisco being such a large company, you wouldn't think they'd be as attuned to this, but they lean very much into social awareness and social issues, whether it's homeless, Black Lives Matter, just a variety of different causes. They also fund a lot of those causes. They encourage employees to take time off, paid time off. They give time off to the employees to support some of these issues, and Juneteenth was one of them. And I mentioned to you that last year they even gave us the day off, and it hadn't even been talked about as or maybe they've been working on it as a national holiday, but they weren't that close. And then this year they just said, hey, it's definitely a day off for everyone, and then soon after that it's going to be a national holiday. So it's been great. But the culture, very attuned to customers and employees and well-being, and that's discussed consistently here. All the global meetings with our executive leadership team, they're always talking about it. They have company doctors come on to talk about stress or different things that may be happening, depending on whether it's just a pandemic or a negative event has happened in the news that might affect people. Just very in touch, or they try to be in touch with their employees.
No, that's fantastic. And when you hear certain things like that, I always want to make sure we point those out because I think now more than ever, with the freedom of working from home and the flexibility and schedules and everything, I think people are getting more out of employees when they're working from home because you don't have that commute. But it's also, I find myself a lot of nights working until 10. So it's that work-life balance. And when you have organizations like Cisco that take that into consideration for the betterment of their business and their resource, which is their human capital, that's fantastic.
To that point, and with a global role and work from home, I'm tethered to the business. It could be 24/7. You've got Asia, you wake up in the morning, it's Europe emails, it's California is different when you live on the East Coast because that 3 hours, does make a difference. But just recently they said, hey, look, we know that everybody's working harder than ever because you do have this time and you are stuck at home. So they're suggesting that everyone block 2 hours a day, at least 2 hours a day of just work, like just downtime. Like you can just shut off your email, shut off your phone, and just do work. Even though you're working, you're in meetings all day. And so the real work happens after the meetings. And so this gives people a little breather and a chance to collect their thoughts and think a little bit.
No, and that's a good point. And there's some people that mention like they had like work yoga or like a yoga instructor or something. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to feel comfortable doing yoga in front of a camera. She goes, no, the cameras are off. And I'm like, okay, maybe that'd be something in a consideration.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back to like the captive question. What's it like when a bank can potentially undercut a captive's rate? My ex-wife used to work for a captive finance organization, and that would come up every now and then. And it's like, oh, can imagine the frustration where the rates are like that. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that's presents itself for Cisco, but
It's not as much that as maybe residual. So, Cisco, because they have a strong balance sheet. Now, if the company that you may be referring to didn't have as strong a balance sheet, then maybe their cost of debt or their cost of funds would be higher than a bank. But actually, Cisco's balance sheet and its rating is pretty strong. So our return targets are much lower. So we don't find that banks undercut us. What we find is sometimes other leasing companies, if they're aggressive, will take higher residuals because the Cisco equipment is known to hold its value. And sometimes they're willing to be more aggressive. Now, they may also backstop that with terms and conditions that allow them to hold customers accountable to certain, conditions, whereas being a captive, you always want to balance supporting the parent in a new sale and not lock up the customer and try to make too much money on the financing. So in a perfect world, we would break even on our financing and we would help sell more equipment. But we also don't want to lose money. So it's always that, balance.
nope, and that makes sense. And thanks for clarifying, because that maybe could have been the case, because they were a global captive, but not at your scope. That's for sure.
Right.
So a few more questions here, if you don't mind. What advice do you have, as I'm not saying you're old, but as a veteran in equipment finance to new entrants? What advice would you have for them, Larry?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great industry, and any industry that, first of all, it's small or it feels small, but it's $1 trillion industry. There is a lot of graying going on in the leadership ranks. And so that leads to opportunities because those people, as they move on, have to be replaced. And a lot of innovation is starting to happen. It's been a very conservative, steady, consistent industry that's now having to deal with the as a service and these payment apps that you were talking about in the beginning, and the millennials and how they do business. So it's an opportunity for them to make change, to influence. It's also what I like, and I, said this to my sons, whether it's a lawyer, doctor, accountant, it's a skill set that differentiates you. Not everybody can do it. If everybody can do it, you wouldn't be able to make a good living. So you got to find a way to specialize or differentiate yourself. And I see the leasing industry as a specialty within finance. It's a great way to go if they're interested in that type of career.
Nope. And the graying, I mean, I have a lot of gray hair, but believe it or not, I turned 40 in 2 months. So I'm kind of like in the middle of where this, someone mentioned a few months ago that it was an hourglass industry. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's like, how do you stretch that hourglass into a cylinder? So it's not just top heavy or bottom, because how do you keep those bottom people interested in staying in it? And that's where I think some of the challenges that run into it with the pandemic and not traveling. Because when I first got into it, I was 23, and it's like I went to a trade show, going to conferences, and it's like these people are fantastic. And if you don't have that connection or that ability to do that, I see that being a potential issue.
Yeah.
But no, good advice nonetheless.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's also just, not a lot of awareness about the industry. I do speak at some graduate school classes once in a while, and we talk about the ELFA or we talk about the leasing industry and just spreading the word. And, a lot of these kids don't realize, what's out there or what it is. So every little bit helps.
Yeah, and I know the Equipment Lease and Finance Foundation has that presentation that people can give to local universities. I'm actually gonna see if I can work with someone probably at Bank of the West, since they're right next to ASU here, to give one of those. It'll be fun.
Yeah, I just heard about that. I haven't seen it, but I'd like to look at it because I haven't used that one. But it sounds like somebody put some thought into it, which is nice.
I will let you know how that goes.
Okay. Sounds good.
And I've been asking everyone I've had on here, Larry, a little fun fact about yourself, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, well, I guess, I don't know how fun it is, but, I always said if I won the lottery, I would quit my job, but I would, work for a charity and I'd learn how to play an instrument and play in a band in a bar. That's what I always wanted to do. I just wanted to, do that. Because whenever I go to a bar and I see a band playing, the guys are having so much fun and the music's great, I'm like, how cool is that? So about 6 years ago, I took up drumming and I joined a band and we played in some bars, and I didn't win the lottery though, and I'm still working, but part of my wish came true. So it's fun.
That's awesome. And what's the name of the band?
Well, I'm not playing in it now because I moved, and then with COVID and everything, but it was called Broken Sound at the time, but we don't play right now.
That is a fantastic name for a band, because it's like, who are these people? It's like, did you hear the name? Like, come on.
It could be like, scratched record or nails on a chalkboard. It's more like our music.
Just having lived in New Jersey for 7 years, I could just I could feel some of those people being like, what is this?
Exactly.
Excellent. And I know you've already talked a lot about Cisco and how great of an organization that is. At the end of the day, I know you guys are in a niche, but why Cisco over the other providers that might offer similar equipment, Larry?
Why Cisco? You mean to work at, or why Cisco?
Both, but both. Like, why work at Cisco, and why partner with Cisco as a captive finance organization?
Well, like I said earlier, on the second part, why partner with Cisco as a captive? Very focused on the customer. Always looking at customer relationships, and we always want to grow the relationship. So growing the business. So enabling Cisco to sell, or their partners, which does the lion's share of the business, enabling them is number one. And so whatever we have to do to help the customer, that's what we do. And so you're always going to get better treatment, I think, and I think that goes for a lot of captives, but it is especially true at Cisco. So we live and breathe that. From a work perspective, I worked in a bank environment. It was very hierarchical. It was also, in some cases, the environment, I don't know the right term, but it was a tougher environment, more stressful environment. And here there's a lot more respect for people, and some old business behaviors aren't tolerated. It's the whole focus on the employee well-being, very collaborative. The other thing too is just a lot of smart people, and you want to be surrounded by smarter people. It feels like everybody went to MIT or Stanford. It's not the case, but there's a lot of them. And so it's great because it always keeps you sharp, keeps you on your toes, and you can always learn from somebody else, which is great. And that's what makes it interesting, is that continual learning and exchange of ideas. So it's just really a good environment.
No, I mean, it sounds like it, and I've learned a lot today, on the organization. So, Larry, I really appreciate you taking some time. I guess my morning, your afternoon, since
Right.
I am 3 hours behind you. And to that point, the U.S. still evolves around East Coast time. So,
except in like basketball games or football games when they go to midnight, and you guys can still watch it at dinner.
Hey, it's 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. You can have a Bloody Mary and watch an NFL game. That's fantastic.
That's right. That's right. So there's pros and cons to everything.
You hit it. You hit the nail on the head there, man. But thanks again for your time, Larry. Greatly appreciated, and I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully over the next few months here.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you having me, and it was great. And thanks again. And I definitely would love to meet you in person at the elfa event. because I'll be there as soon as they let you sign up.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time, Larry. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.